The 9,263rd meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in the Middle East, including the Palestinian question. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representatives of Israel and Qatar to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. I propose that the Council invite the permanent observer of the Observer State of Palestine to the United Nations to participate in this meeting in accordance with the Provisional Rules of Procedure and the previous practice in this regard. There being no objection, it is so decided. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the following briefers to participate in this meeting. Mr. Tor Wennesland, Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process, and Ms. Lenny Stenseth, Deputy Commissioner General of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of Item 2 of the agenda. After consultations among Council members, I have been authorized to make the following statement on their behalf. The Security Council reaffirms the right of all states to live in peace within secure and internationally recognized borders, and stresses that both the Israeli and Palestinian people are entitled to equal measures of freedom, security, prosperity, justice, and dignity. The Security Council reaffirmed its unwavering commitment to the vision of the two-state solution, where two democratic states, Israel and Palestine, live side by side in peace within secure and recognized borders, consistent with international law and relevant UN resolutions. The Security Council expresses deep concern and dismay with Israel's announcement on February 12, 2023, announcing further construction and expansion of settlements and the legitimization of settlement outposts. The Security Council reiterates that continuing Israeli settlement activities are dangerously imperiling the viability of the two-state solution based on the 1967 lines. The Security Council strongly underscores the need for all parties to meet their international obligations and commitments, strongly opposes all unilateral measures that impede peace, including, inter alia, Israeli construction and expansion of settlements, confiscation of Palestinians' land, and the legalization of settlement outposts, demolition of Palestinians' homes, and displacement of Palestinian civilians. The Security Council condemns all acts of violence against civilians, including acts of terrorism, and calls for the strengthening of ongoing efforts to counter terrorism in a manner consistent with international law, and for all parties to clearly condemn all acts of terrorism and refrain from incitement to violence, and reiterates the obligation of all parties regarding the pursuit of accountability for all acts of violence targeting civilians, and recalls the obligation of the Palestinian Authority to renounce and confront terror. The Security Council calls on all parties to observe calm and restraint, and to refrain from provocative actions, incitement, and inflammatory rhetoric, with the aim, inter alia, of de-escalating the situation on the ground, rebuilding trust and confidence, demonstrating through policies and actions a genuine commitment to the two-state solution, and creating the conditions necessary for promoting peace. The Security Council emphasizes the importance of the safety and well-being of all civilians and calls for full respect for international humanitarian law, including the protection of the civilian population, and also calls for facilitating access of humanitarian workers to populations in need, and reiterates the need to take appropriate steps to ensure the safety and well-being of civilians and their protection. The Security Council notes with deep concern instances of discrimination, intolerance, and hate speech motivated by racism or directed against persons belonging to religious communities, in particular cases motivated by Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, and Christianophobia. The Security Council calls for upholding unchanged the historic status quo at the holy sites in Jerusalem in word and in practice, and emphasizes in this regard the special role of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. This statement will be issued as a document of the Security Council under the symbol S/PRST/2022/1. I now give the floor to Mr. Tor Wennesland. It is 22.
Madam President, members of the Security Council, we are witnessing a surge in violence, including some of the deadliest incidents in nearly 20 years. I'm concerned that the developments on the grounds are continuing their negative trajectory, gaining in both pace and intensity. At the same time, unilateral actions are moving the parties still further apart, exacerbating tensions and driving the conflict. Immediate efforts are required to reduce tension, but restoring calm is not, on its own, a recipe for progress. The UN, along with regional and international partners, have engaged intensively with all parties to de-escalate the situation. In particular, I appreciate your efforts in the Council to focus attention on the situation here as reflected in the statement from the President. I call upon the parties to meet security efforts with political steps that can halt the negative slide and restore hope in an end to conflict and prospects for a viable two-state solution. Madam President, since I last briefed the Council, we have seen an alarming number of fatalities. 40 Palestinians, including 1 woman and 7 children, have been killed in the occupied West Bank. In the same period, 10 Israelis, including 1 woman, 3 children, and 1 security personnel, as well as 1 female foreign national, have been killed. A significant number of Palestinian casualties have occurred in the context of Israeli security forces' search and arrest operation and clashes with armed Palestinians, including in Area A in the occupied West Bank. On 26 January, 10 Palestinians, including militants and a 61-year-old woman, were killed in the Jenin refugee camp. A few days later, 30 January, ISAF killed 5 armed Palestinians during an arrest operations that led to an exchange of fire in Aqab Jabr, a refugee camp near Jericho. Those killed were later claimed by Hamas as members of the armed wing. 2 terrorist attacks were carried out in occupied East Jerusalem. 6 Israelis, including a child, and 1 foreign national were killed in a shooting attack perpetrated by a Palestinian outside a synagogue on 27 January, and 3 Israelis, including 2 children, were killed in a ramming attack on 10 February. 2 Palestinians were killed by settlers in the occupied West Bank, 1 while attempting to carry out stabbing attack on 21st of January, and 1 shot in a confrontation with a group of settlers near a Palestinian village on the 11th of February. On 13 February, a Palestinian boy stabbed an ISF personnel in East Jerusalem, during which a second ISF was shot and killed in a friendly fire incident. As the Secretary General noted last month, the current escalation of violence is deeply worrying. There can never be any excuse for acts of terrorism and targeting of civilians, which must be clearly condemned and rejected by all. Celebration and glorification of such attacks is abhorrent and must be unequivocally condemned. I reiterate that the perpetrators of all acts of violence must be held accountable and swiftly brought to justice. Security forces must exercise maximum restraints and use lethal forces only when strictly unavoidable to protect life. I am particularly appalled that children continue to be the victims of violence and involved in violent incidents. Children must never be targeted of violence, used or put in harm's way. Madam President, amid the mounting violence, there was also a concerning deterioration in the relationship between Israel and Palestinian Authority. Following the 26th January Israeli search and arrest operation in Jenin, the Palestinian Authority announced that security coordination with Israel, quote, no longer exists, unquote. Following the 27th January terrorist attack in Jerusalem, the Israeli Security Cabinet announced a series of measures including steps to reinforce security, strengthen Israeli settlements, and punitive measures against the perpetrators of the attacks in Jerusalem and their families. On 2nd February, Israel's finance minister announced an increase in monthly deduction from clearance revenue that Israeli collects on behalf of the PA. The deduction carried out in line with an Israeli law mandating the government to withhold the equivalent of what it says the PA pays to Palestinian perpetrators of attacks against Israelis or their families would be doubled from approximately 15 to 30 million US dollars per month. In light of these deductions, the PA said it is expected to maintain and potentially increase measures such as paying partial salaries for PA employees, which will impact severely health delivery, education, and social support services. The financial implication of these various factors clearly contribute to undermining the stability of the PA. Madam President, significant decisions were announced by the Israeli government related to settlement advancement and settlement outposts. On 12 February, the Israeli Security Cabinet announced that it had decided to authorize 9 illegal outposts in the occupied West Bank. It also said that the civil administration's higher planning committee would convene in the coming days to advance housing units in the settlements, and that police and border police units in Jerusalem would be reinforced and their operations expanded. Such outposts increase the settlement footprint and create friction points in the occupied West Bank. The announcement was met with widespread opposition from the Palestinian Authority and members of the international community. Many emphasized that such unilateral moves exacerbate tensions and undermine prospects for a negotiated two-state solution. Israeli settlements, including outposts, are illegal under international law and remain a substantial obstacle to peace. Demolitions and seizures of Palestinian-owned property also remain a serious concern. During the reporting period, the Israeli authorities demolished deeds of forced owners to demolish 52 Palestinian-owned structures in Area B and C, and 46 in occupied East Jerusalem, displacing 130 Palestinians, including 68 children. The demolitions were carried out due to the lack of Israeli-issued building permits, which are nearly impossible for Palestinians to obtain. On 7 February, Israeli High Court of Justice instructed the government to submit by 2nd April its response to a petition seeking a forced implementation of standing demolition orders against the Bedouin village of Khan el-Ahmar. The government had requested a postponement up until 1st of June. Also, on 7 February, Israeli authorities said they would postpone the demolition of a multi-story structure housing some 100 Palestinians in East Jerusalem neighborhood of Silvan. The postponement came a day after the police had told residents they should move forward with demolitions. I am concerned by the significant increase in demolitions, particularly in East Jerusalem. I urge Israel to cease this practice in line with its obligation under international humanitarian law. Madam President, turning to Gaza, the relative calm of the past few months was interrupted by exchange of fire during the reporting period, once again demonstrating the fragility of the ceasefire. Palestinian militants in Gaza fired rockets from the Strip towards Israel on 6 occasions. A total of 11 rockets were fired, of which 5 were intercepted by Iron Dome, 2 landed in open areas, and 1 fell short in Gaza. In retaliation, ISF carried out airstrikes on 14 occasions against what is said were Hamas militant targets on the Strip, causing damage. I reiterate that the indiscriminate launching of rockets towards the Israeli population center violates international law and must stop immediately. Madam President, the UN continued to deliver vital humanitarian and development assistance to Palestinians in Gaza and remains engaged with all parties to reduce access restrictions to support the Gaza economy and basic service delivery. Increasing the movement of goods, in particular between Gaza and West Bank, is vital for the Gaza economy to grow and generate employment opportunities. Such linkages can help sustain a vision for a political solution to the Gaza challenges. Madam President, I welcome the important regional and international diplomatic efforts during the reporting period aimed at avoiding a deterioration on the ground. In January, U.S. Secretary of State Blinken visited Israel and the occupied Palestinian territory, meeting with Israeli and Palestinian leaders in an effort to advance concrete steps by both parties to lower the temperature, to foster greater cooperation, and to bolster people's security. The visit coincided with a visit by senior officials from Egypt and Jordan, who met together with President Abbas on 31 January. Madam President, turning to the region on Golan, the ceasefire between Israel and Syria has been generally maintained despite continued violation by both parties of the 1974 agreement of disengagement of forces. The Israeli Defense Forces on 28 January fired at 2 individuals from the Bravo side in the vicinity of the ceasefire line, injuring one, who later succumbed to his injuries. In Lebanon, the situation along the Blue Line remains mostly calm. UNIFIL interposed between the Israeli Defense Forces and the Lebanese Armed Forces on 18 and 19 January near Sarda, and on 23 and 24 January near Markava, in connection with vegetation clearing works by the Israeli Defense Forces. Madam President, we have seen ominous signs of what awaits if we fail to address the current instability. Preventing more violence is an urgent priority, which requires not only coordinated security measures, but also considerable political efforts. As such, I urge both sides to avoid unilateral steps that could further inflame the situation. I reiterate my appeal to the parties to rein in violence and incitements and hold perpetrators accountable. In particular, there is a need to address the instability in the West Bank, characterized by spiraling tension between ISF and armed Palestinian factions, and friction points between settlers and Palestinians, which drive more violence and emboldens extremists. Restoring security coordination and ensuring the Palestinian security forces can operate effectively is key. At the same time, I urge to halt all settlement expansions, as well as demolitions and evictions which fuel these tensions. With the holy month of Ramadan once again coinciding with Passover and Eastern holidays this year, joint efforts are needed to ensure that the period passes safely and peacefully for all. Provocations, disinformation, and efforts by extremists to stoke violence must be addressed swiftly and effectively. In this context, I reiterate the Secretary General's call for all parties to refrain from steps that could escalate tensions in and around the holy sites, and for all to uphold the status quo in line with the special role of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. As we continue to work with the parties and with regional and international partners to calm tension, we must identify and pursue every opportunity to advance our long-term goal, an end to the occupation, and the establishment of two states living side by side in peace and security on the basis of the 67 lines in line with UN resolutions, international law, and previous agreements. Thank you.
I thank Mr. Wennesland for his briefing. I now give the floor to Ms. Leni Stenstedt.
Madam President, distinguished members of the Security Council, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me begin by thanking you, Madam President, for your invitation to the United Nations Relief and Work Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East, UNRWA, to brief the Council. I wish to convey the warm regards from the Commissioner General, Philippe Lazzarini, and his regret for being unable to meet with you and all members of the Security Council today. Madam President, a growing number of Palestine refugees in the region stand on the brink of despair. Multiple crises, conflicts, the never-ending occupation, the socio-economic ramifications of the COVID-19 pandemic, and rising global food and fuel prices caused by the conflict in Ukraine have pushed a growing number of Palestine refugees into poverty. Competing global priorities and shifting regional dynamics have almost annihilated any remaining attention to the plight of Palestine refugees today. Meanwhile, the political, socioeconomic, and security conditions that surround the refugees continue to deteriorate. In the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, this year has already witnessed a record high number of deaths among Palestinians, including Palestine refugees. Casualties among Israelis are also of grave concern. We can almost anticipate that coming weeks will likely bring more violence, deaths, and more life-changing injuries, including for bystanders and children in the West Bank. I echo the Special Coordinator's call to reduce the tension and prevent further loss of life. This cycle of violence must end before it's too late. For UNRWA, the violence in the West Bank hampers our operations and puts a heavy toll on the Palestine refugees that we serve. Palestine refugees living in northern West Bank, including in and around Jenin and Nablus, are particularly vulnerable to surrounding violence and tensions, which have at times forced UNRWA to interrupt its critical services, including its health centers. Urban spaces within and around densely populated refugee camps should not be venues for clashes with automatic weapons and tear gas. Children, including refugee children, have been far from immune to this spiraling violence, which has created an explosive and dangerous environment of fear, anger, desperation, and hopelessness. In Gaza, years of blockade and conflict have isolated the population from the rest of the world, creating a human tragedy that is hard to describe. Over 80% of Palestinian refugees in the Strip are poor, and nearly all of them rely on food assistance from UNRWA. Nearly half of the children attending our schools in Gaza showed signs of trauma, scars which may accompany them for the rest of their lives. In Gaza, we must always be prepared for an outbreak of conflict, not least because our schools are usually the only safe havens for people who flee their homes. We repeatedly call on all parties in Gaza and in the West Bank to respect our neutrality and the inviolability of our premises. Madam President, in Syria, the recent devastating earthquake is adding to the hardship and despair of a population already grappling with the shattering 12-year-old conflict and its aftermath. Some 62,000 Palestinian refugees living in 4 camps were affected by the earthquake, with 90% of them in need of emergency assistance already prior to the earthquake. In Lebanon, the collapse of the economy has hit the most vulnerable the hardest, among them also Palestinian refugees, 93% of whom are now living in poverty. Children in Palestine refugee camps are exposed to multiple forms of violence, exploitation, abuse, and neglect, as their caregivers and communities have exhausted their resources and their ability to create a safe and protective environment for children. The situation is so desperate that Palestinian refugees are increasingly willing to risk their lives at sea in a desperate attempt to achieve a dignified life. In Jordan, despite overall stability, Palestinian refugees struggle with socioeconomic conditions that worsen with a declining national economy. Gender-based violence and negative coping strategies, including early marriage and child labor, are on the rise in all fields of operation. And across all fields, Palestinian refugees feel abandoned by the international community. Madam President, UNRWA has continued to deliver on its mandate against this challenging background. By providing public-like services, including education, health, and social services, UNRWA has contributed to the human development of Palestinian refugees and has helped maintain a relatively stable environment around them. As we look at the Middle East, UNRWA remains one of the few standing pillars of stability. A pillar of stability for Palestinian refugees, for the countries that host them, and for the region. UNRWA is, in fact, one of the most successful multilateral and collective efforts of the last 75 years. As we speak, 500,000 children are going to our 700 schools across the region. These schools are a beacon of hope for Palestinian refugees, boys and girls, and often the only hope they have in what is otherwise a desperate situation. UNRWA schools produce the future partners for peace that this region needs and that this Council is constantly seeking. Madam President, Excellencies, the lack of adequate, sustainable, and predictable funding has put UNRWA in an impossible situation. We have reached the limit of what we can do with the resources we have available today. Our total income in 2022 was approximately the same as in 2013, while the needs and the costs are exponentially greater today. Status quo is no longer sustainable. And as the quality of our services decline, so will our ability to contribute to the region's stability. Avoiding UNRWA's implosion is our collective interest and should be our collective responsibility. In the absence of a political solution, UNRWA remains irreplaceable, including in terms of its stabilizing role. UNRWA's contribution to peace and security is extraordinarily cost-effective, helping to secure the present and future of millions of people in a highly fragile region. There, Madam President, Excellencies, there can be no peace nor security in the region without the fulfillment of the basic rights of all, including Palestinian refugees. We call on you today not to abandon them. We call on you today to give them back hope by redoubling efforts to find a political solution. And we call on you and all member states to continue supporting UNRWA politically and financially, ensuring that it has the resources it needs to deliver on its mandate. And as we approach the 75th commemoration of UNRWA's mandate, let me close by reiterating our Commissioner General's invitation to reflect on how the international community should live up to its commitment and responsibility towards Palestinian refugees while a just and lasting solution to their plight is found. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank Ms. Stanstead for her briefing. I now give the floor to members of the Security Council who wish to make a statement. I give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Special Coordinator Winsland and Deputy Commissioner General Stanstead, for your briefing. Colleagues, we are deeply troubled by the spiraling violence across Israel, the West Bank, and Jerusalem. We strongly condemn the recent terrorist attacks in Israel, including the horrific attack outside of a synagogue in East Jerusalem on January 27th, and the attack on civilians, including children at a bus stop in Jerusalem on February 10th. The deliberate targeting of innocent civilians is unconscionable, and the United States supports Israel's right to self-defense. Terrorist attacks on religious sites, attacks by settlers, attacks on security services, rockets launched against civilian areas, and other forms of violence create a cycle of increasingly dangerous escalations. This concern is raised by the upcoming period of religious holidays in Jerusalem. We urge all parties to take steps to restore and maintain calm, and we underscore all visitors and worshipers should respect and maintain the historic status quo of the holy sites in word and in practice. It is essential Israelis and Palestinians immediately break the cycle of violence and de-escalate and refrain from any unilateral or divisive actions that will bring us even further from peace and stability. Now let me add a clear, unequivocal statement. We strongly oppose Israel's announcement that it will advance thousands of settlement units, and we strongly oppose Israel's announcement that it began a process to retroactively legalize 9 outposts in the West Bank that were previously illegal under Israeli law. These unilateral measures exacerbate tensions. They harm trust between the parties. They undermine the prospects for a negotiated 2-state solution. The United States does not support these actions, full stop. The clear and long-standing position of the United States is settlement activity is unhelpful and puts us further away from a negotiated 2-state solution. These actions are simply detrimental to Israel's long-term security and to our vision of a sustainable end to the conflict. So we call on all parties to work toward the conditions necessary for direct negotiations between Israelis and Palestinians, which is the only path to a sustainable end to the conflict and a 2-state solution. That's why we strongly support the presidential statement put forward by the United Arab Emirates, which demonstrates the Security Council's unanimous collective voice on these issues. The PRST is real diplomacy at work, and we believe it signifies to all parties how seriously this council takes these threats to peace. The United States joined the other members of this council in asking both Israelis and Palestinians to take the urgent and necessary steps to restore calm and improve the quality of life for their people. The Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, by virtue of its special role over Muslim holy sites in Jerusalem, has an indispensable role to play in helping to preserve stability, which could be tested by the impending conversions of Passover, Ramadan, and Easter, when tensions tend to run high. Ultimately, the parties themselves are the ones that can and must prevent a further downward spiral. In this regard, the United States stands ready to support the parties as they work to rebuild trust and create a foundation for an eventual return to negotiations. At this moment of heightened tensions, we must be sure to support UNRWA, which serves as a lifeline to Palestinians and plays an important stabilizing role in the region. For our part, the United States has already announced nearly $50 million in support for UNRWA this new year. We call on our partners to provide early, predictable, and flexible funding to UNRWA to ensure the vital services it provides to the Palestinian people continue uninterrupted. And let us continue to do everything we can to extend the horizon of hope and push for peace. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States and pass the floor to the representative of Ghana.
Madam President, let me begin by thanking the Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process, Tor Wensland, and the Deputy Commissioner General of UNRWA, Lenny Stenseth, for their briefings. We encourage their further efforts for peace and in addressing the plight of the Palestinian people. We also welcome the participation in this meeting of the representatives of Israel and Qatar, as well as the observer of the State of Palestine. The Security Council, as we know, has a historical responsibility for the situation in Palestine. When we hear briefings such as we have received this morning, the Council must be united around its established positions on the question of Palestine. The concerning situation that the briefing conveys should reinforce our unyielding commitment to uphold the two-state solution, to address the deteriorating security and humanitarian situation in the occupied Palestinian territories, and to redress the reversal of the peace and security gains achieved for the region after the ceasefire in May 2021. It is in this context that we support the presidential statement just agreed to by the Council. Like most other members of the international community, Ghana is seriously and understandably so concerned by the recent Israeli government policy intent and actions that expand the illegal settlements in occupied Palestinian territory, including through the retroactive approval of settlement outposts, the further expansion of Jewish settlements in the West Bank, and the demolition of Palestinian-owned homes and structures in the West Bank. These actions, besides violating Palestinian rights, portends a de facto annexation of the West Bank and contravenes Israel's obligations under the Fourth Geneva Convention. We are seriously concerned by the consequences the recent steps of the Israeli government have on the viability of the two-state solution and the impact it has for the security of the region. We urge the government of Israel to situate its actions within the limits of her obligations under international law, international humanitarian law, and the prescriptions established through the resolutions of this Council. Its action must help to abate the violations of the basic human rights of Palestinians, including the forceful demolition of their properties, transfer of forced evictions, arbitrary arrests, administrative detention, unlawful killings, and the denial of their basic rights to free movement and economic opportunities. Madam President, we however remain cognizant of Israel's security concerns and condemn all incidents of attacks against its populations and territory, including recent violent attacks such as stabbings, kidnappings, and the launch of rockets from Gaza into Jerusalem and other Israeli civilian settlements. We encourage the active security cooperation of the Palestinian Authority of Israel in order to address the negative actions of Palestinian militant groups. We remain concerned by the sharp increase in violent attacks in the West Bank and in Jerusalem and other Israeli settlements, which has resulted in several fatalities on both sides during the reporting period, with many injuries and others in critical conditions. Besides the physical damage and destruction to civil infrastructure, the interminable cycle of violence also negatively affects the economy's health and socio-political lives of millions of people in the Middle East region. We urge all parties to observe calm and exercise restraint and deem it important to prioritize the protection of civilians. We particularly find it regrettable that children who deserve to live in peace and exploit their God-given talents are being made victims of violence and used as tools of violence. Given that the experience of children have a lasting impact on their physical, mental, emotional, and psychosocial development, a departure from such a healthy and sound environment has serious and enduring negative consequences on their cognitive and emotional development. We therefore deplore the recent increase in the spate of violent clashes involving children in the occupied Palestinian territories, especially in the West Bank. The international community's muted reaction to the need for investigations into systematic violations of human rights and other crimes by the parties has not been helpful to stabilizing the volatile situation on the ground. We urge a reconsideration of that position and remind the parties of their obligations under international law and the several resolutions of this Council. We urge them to refrain from unilateral actions that obstruct and undermine efforts aimed at achieving a comprehensive and just peace to the decades-old conflict. Madam President, we call on the leadership of both Israel and Palestine, as well as regional stakeholders, to continue engaging in a meaningful and transparent manner in order to effect significant policy changes that support the efforts for durable peace through a political resolution based on equal rights and justice. We note the sensitivities of the holy sites in Jerusalem and call for upholding the status quo ante. The object of religion, which is peace, should not be a basis for violence. We encourage further financial and relevant support for the activities of UNRWA, whose continuing existence in support of the needed services by Palestinian refugees is a reflection of how much more needs to be done to achieve the goals of a just and durable solution to the Palestinian question. Finally, in concluding, I reiterate Ghana's continuing commitment for reinvigorating the Middle East peace process through renewed and constructive dialogue on a political horizon that leads to a peaceful resolution of the conflict and ultimately the realization of the two-state solution on the basis of the 1967 lines with Jerusalem as a shared capital. I thank you for your kind attention.
I thank the representative of Ghana and pass the floor to the representative of Brazil.
Thank you. Madam President, Brazil thanks Mr. Wensland for the comprehensive updates and for his tireless work and continuous engagement with all parties and stakeholders while working to de-escalate tensions and open avenues for dialogue. I also thank Deputy Commissioner General Leni Stenset for her contribution. Brazil has been following closely and with great concern the fast-forwarding events in Israel and Palestine, which have been aggravating tensions, especially in the West Bank and Jerusalem, and taking us to a very dangerous point. As the level of violence increases, so does the number of civilian casualties, including children, as well as the suffering and trauma that so many years of conflict have caused. The fragility of the situation highlights the urgency of a renewed commitment to resolving this long-lasting conflict. We must act to prevent the conflict from spilling out of control, which can end up affecting the entire region. In this sense, as Mr. Wesleyan has frequently reiterated, addressing the root causes of the current tensions is key. The continuous expansion of the Israeli settlements is a well-known source of tensions and violence. In this regard, Brazil and other countries of our region have publicly stated deep concern about the recent decision of the government of Israel to legalize 9 outposts and build 10,000 houses in existing settlements in the West Bank. These unilateral measures constitute serious violations of international law, including Resolution 2334, the latest adopted by this Council. Besides constituting flagrant violations of United Nations resolutions and international law, settlements undermine the prospects of achieving the desired outcome of a two-state solution by systematically eroding the possibility of establishing a contiguous, independent, viable, and sovereign Palestinian state. We therefore reiterate the provisions of Resolution 2334, which clearly state that the establishment by Israel of settlements in the Palestinian territory occupied since 1967, including East Jerusalem, has no legal validity for the aforementioned reasons and should cease immediately. Madam President, Brazil urges all parties to exercise maximum restraint and avoid provocations and unilateral actions, including heated rhetoric which could further aggravate tensions. It should not be necessary at this point to remind them of their obligations under international humanitarian law, including Security Council resolutions approved throughout the years, and that is valid to the question of settlements, but also to other violations of international law that are contributing to the current crisis. Civilians must be protected in times of conflict. The distinction of civilians and combatants is the core of international humanitarian law. All parties must work immediately to uphold this crucial IHL foundational principle to reverse this terrible trend of violence. Cooperation aiming at the security of civilians, besides preventing the loss of lives, could serve as an important confidence building measure. Equally concerned are the recent attacks of religious sites, such as the February 2nd vandalism of the Flagellation Chapel in Jerusalem. We urge all political leaders and authorities to promote a culture of peaceful coexistence and religious freedom. Brazil also condemns all actions linked to the idea of changing the historic status quo of the holy sites in Jerusalem. We should not undermine in this regard the crucial custodian role of the Kingdom of Jordan in preserving peace at the holy sites over the years. Peace also depends, and we emphasize, on the commitment to the promotion of human rights for all. Poverty, food insecurity, hopelessness, and a general sense of injustice create the perfect breeding ground for extremist forces to flourish. In this sense, we stress the need for improving the living conditions of the Palestinian people by working to strengthen the Palestinian economy and to address the challenge of governance. The situation in Gaza is particularly concerning, as the blockade continues to hinder development efforts. Brazil remains concerned with the chronic financial challenges faced by UNRWA, which has been providing much-needed humanitarian assistance to Palestinian refugees. We must not undermine the role played by UNRWA throughout the years to maintain stability on the ground. Madam President, Brazil reaffirms its long-standing commitment to the two-state solution, with Palestine and Israel living side by side in peace and security within mutually agreed and internationally recognized borders. We also remain committed to the idea of peace, to the achievement without delay of a comprehensive, just and lasting peace in the Middle East on the basis of international law and relevant United Nations resolutions. We stand ready, therefore, to constructively engage in initiatives aiming at a more proactive contribution by the Council to the cause of peace. Madam President, in the view of the above, Brazil expresses its full support to the statements of the Presidency in this session, and I thank you.
I thank the representative of Brazil and pass the floor to the representative of Ecuador.
Señora Presidenta,
Madam President,
agradezco los informes que se han presentado y que dan cuenta una vez más de una situación preocupante y difícil. Al respecto, en línea con la declaración de la Presidencia del Consejo que acabamos de adoptar, que es la primera en 9 años sobre este tema, deseo referirme a 4 puntos de especial importancia. En primer lugar, debo recordar que un deterioro de la situación solo causará más sufrimiento, muerte y destrucción para las partes. Es inconcebible que haya quien no se dé cuenta de esta realidad. Deben agotarse esfuerzos para evitar mayor violencia. En este sentido, valoramos, agradecemos y expresamos nuestro total apoyo a la labor del coordinador Thor Wennesland y hacemos votos para que sus esfuerzos tengan los resultados que todos deseamos. De la misma forma, forma, valoramos la labor de UNRWA, su compromiso con aliviar la situación humanitaria y sus esfuerzos ante los efectos del terremoto que afectó la región. Llamamos a continuar apoyando su trabajo, que es de fundamental importancia. En segundo lugar, el Ecuador, como ha sido su política exterior, condena en los más enérgicos términos todo tipo de violencia contra civiles y actos de terrorismo, así como su inaceptable glorificación, actos como el que causó la muerte de 3 civiles, entre ellos 2 niños en Jerusalén Oriental, el 10 de febrero, deben ser repudiados por todos. Instamos a velar por la vida y la seguridad de las personas y recordamos también que en todo momento y sin excusa alguna se deben respetar las normas del derecho internacional humanitario. En tercer lugar, condenamos las decisiones unilaterales que alejan la posibilidad de alcanzar un arreglo definitivo, con la existencia de 2 estados sobre la base de las fronteras de 1967. El anuncio de una legalización de asentamientos en los territorios ocupados y la construcción de más edificaciones en los mismos es una decisión unilateral, contraria al derecho internacional y a las resoluciones del Consejo de Seguridad. Son resoluciones que exacerban el ambiente y hacen más difícil el camino hacia la paz y la seguridad. Para concluir, deseo reiterar un llamado a los líderes a demostrar verdadera valentía y actuar en función de los intereses a largo plazo de sus pueblos, priorizando acciones que bajen la tensión y conduzcan a reiniciar negociaciones para todos, alcanzar una solución definitiva, único camino para que se pueda vivir en paz, seguridad y dignidad. Muchas gracias.
The representative of Ecuador and pass the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Спасибо, госпожа председатель.
Thank you, Madam President.
Благодарим спецкоординатора ООН по
We'd
Ближнему
like to
Востоку
thank the
Тора
UN
Венесланда
Special Coordinator for the
за
Middle
брифинг
East
по
Peace
ситуации
Process,
ближневосточного
Tor
регулирования.
Wennesland for his briefing on the
Внимательно
Middle East
выслушали
Peace
заместителя
Process. We
генерального
carefully
комиссара
listened
БОПОР
to the
Ленис
Deputy
Тенсет.
Commissioner General for UNRWA, Ms. Lenise Tensa.
Очередной виток
This
эскалации
latest
насилия
spike
в зоне
in the
Палестино-израильского
escalation of
конфликта
violence in the
вновь продемонстрировал
Israeli-Palestinian
опасность и
conflict once again has
деструктивность
shown how
отсутствия
dangerous
мирного
and destructive it is
процесса,
not to have
де-факто
a peace
заблокированного
process. This
нашими
de facto
коллегами
has
в
been
Совете
blocked by
Безопасности
our Security
в
Council
интересах
colleagues
одной из
in the
сторон.
interest of one of the parties.
На фоне растущей
Given
оккупационной
the
и военной израильской активности
in
хроника
Israel's
палестинских
occupation and
новостей
military
превратилась
activities,
в череду
Palestinian
сообщений
news
об
has
убийствах,
turned into a succession of
произвольных
reports
задержаниях,
about murders, arbitrary
негуманном обращении с
detentions,
заключенными,
inhumane treatment of prisoners,
насильственном
forced
выселении,
displacement,
экспроприации и
expropriation,
уничтожении
and the
собственности.
destruction of property.
Соответствующую статистику мы
The
уже
statistics are
приводили
ones
на
that we
одном
have
из
already
предыдущих заседаний.
provided in a previous meeting.
Начало же этого года
At the start of this
ознаменовалось
year,
очередными дестабилизирующими
there
коррупционными
were
шагами.
ongoing destabilizing steps
Посещением министра
taken.
национальной
There was
безопасности
the
Израиля
visit of
господином
Mr.
Бен-Гвиром
Ben
территории
Gvir,
комплекса
the
мечети
Israeli
Аль-Акса,
National Security Minister,
кровопролитным
to
рейдом
the
израильских военнослужащих
Al-Aqsa
города Дженин,
Mosque complex, the bloody
за
raid by
которым
the Israeli
последовали
armed forces
терроратаки
to
в Восточном
Jenin, and that was
Иерусалиме.
followed by terrorist attacks in East Jerusalem.
Решением израильских властей
The
легализовать
decision
9
then by
форпостов
Israeli
и утвердить
authorities
планы
to
по строительству
authorize
около
9
10 тысяч
outposts and
домов
to approve
в
plans to
поселениях
build
на
about
западном берегу реки Иордан.
10,000 units in settlements in the West
На этом
Bank.
фоне намерение израильтян вдвое
The
увеличить
Israelis'
к
intention to
2026
double
году
by
численность переселенцев,
2026 the
проживающих в
number
долине
of
реки
settlers
Иордан,
living
а
in the
также на
Jordan
сирийских
Valley
Голландских
and
высотах,
also in the Syrian Golan Heights
могут рассматриваться
we
как
believe can be
де-факто
deemed as de
аннексия
facto
большей части
annexation of a
оккупированной
large part
палестинской,
of the
а также
occupied
сирийской территории.
Palestinian and Syrian territories.
Поддерживаем
We
принятое по этому
support
вопросу сегодня заявление председателя Совета Безопасности.
PRST that has been adopted today on this.
Решительно осуждаем
We
также
firmly
израильские удары по
condemn
Сирии,
the Israeli
дополнительно
strikes on
серьезно
Syria.
дестабилизирующую
That is just
обстановку в
one
регионе
more
Ближнего
serious
Востока.
destabilizing factor in the Middle East.
С глубокой
We
озабоченностью
are extremely
воспринимаем подобное
concerned
развитие
by
событий.
these developments.
Призываем все
We
стороны
urge
проявлять
all
максимальную
parties to
сдержанность
demonstrate maximum
и не
restraint
допускать дальнейшей
and to
эскалации
prevent a further
напряженности.
escalation of tension.
Особенно
We
принимая
draw
во
particular
внимание тот
attention
факт,
to
что
the
обострение
fact that
обстановки
the
традиционно
situation
происходит,
often
к сожалению,
worsens,
в периоды
unfortunately,
религиозных
during
праздников,
the religious
в
holiday
частности,
period, and in particular,
приближающегося
the
священного для мусульман
forthcoming
месяца Рамадан.
Muslim holy month of Ramadan.
Госпожа председатель,
Madam President,
последние события со всей
recent
очевидностью
events
подтверждают
have clearly
необходимость
shown the need
безотлагательного
for a
возобновления
swift resumption
конструктивного
of constructive
палестино-израильского диалога и
Palestinian-Israeli
отказа от
dialogue and a
односторонних действий.
rejection of unilateral actions.
Конец порочному кругу насилия
A vicious cycle of violence
можно положить только
can
в
only be
рамках
brought to an
основанного на
end
принципах
through an
международного права
international
переговорного процесса,
law-based negotiation
итогом
process.
которого
The
должно стать
result of
создание
this should be
независимого
the
палестинского
establishment of an
государства
independent
в границах
Palestinian state
1967
within
года,
the 1967
живущего в мире и
borders, living
безопасности
in
с
peace
Израилем.
and security with Israel.
Отсутствие политического
The
горизонта
lack of political
в сочетании с
prospects
наращиванием Израилем односторонних шагов
the ongoing unilateral steps taken by
подрывают не только
Israel
основу урегулирования,
undermines not only the
но и
prospects for a
доверие к мирному
settlement, but
процессу как
also
таковому,
trust in the peace process in and of itself.
ведут к
And it
радикализации
leads to
обеих сторон.
radicalization by both sides.
На этом фоне,
Given
несмотря на
this,
декларативные
despite
усилия Израиля по
the,
экономическому содействию палестинцам,
declared intentions by Israel to help
наблюдается
Palestinians,
последовательная деградация
there is
общей
an ongoing
социальной и гуманитарной
deterioration of
обстановки на
the
оккупированных палестинских
overall
территориях.
social and economic situation in the occupied Palestinian
В таких условиях
territories.
необходимо
In such
обеспечить
circumstances, there's a
продолжение
need to
эффективных усилий
ensure
в опор
ongoing
по
effective
оказанию
efforts
комплексного
by
содействия на
UNRWA
западном берегу
to
реки
provide
Иордан и в секторе
comprehensive
Газа,
humanitarian
а
assistance
также
in
в
the West
соседних
Bank
арабских
and
странах.
in the Gaza Strip and also in neighboring Arab
В этой
countries.
связи
In this
призываем
regard,
международных
we would
доноров
urge
откликнуться
international
на
donors
экстренный
to
призыв
respond
агентства по
favorably
сбору
to the emergency
2,7
appeal
миллионов
of the
долларов США
agency for rather $2.7 million
для оказания помощи
to provide
палестинским
assistance
беженцам,
to
пострадавшим
Palestinian
от
refugees
землетрясения
who are victims of
Турции
the
и
earthquake
Сирии.
in Turkey and Syria.
Госпожа председатель,
Madam President,
в данном тревожном контексте
in this
первоочередную
worrisome
задачу
context, we
видим в
believe the top
достижении прочной
priority is to
стабилизации ситуации
achieve
на
a
земле
lasting stabilization of the
и
situation on the ground
восстановлении
and to
политического
restore
горизонта для
political
реанимирования
prospects to
мирного процесса
revive the
ближневосточного
Middle East peace
урегулирования на
process
общепризнанной
on
международно-правовой основе
recognized international
с
legal
центральным элементом
bases, with the central
двухгосударственным
focus
решением.
being a two-state solution or the two-state solution.
Необходимо также
There's
добиваться
also a need
межпалестинского
to
примирения,
ensure
являющееся
inter-Palestinian
важнейшим
reconciliation.
условием
This is
реанимирования
a
мирного
key
процесса.
component for the peace process.
Как постоянный член
As a
Совета
permanent member
Безопасности
of the
ООН
UN
и
Security
участник
Council and
международного
a member
квартета
of the International
ближневосточных
Quartet
посредников,
of Middle East
Россия готова
mediators,
вносить
Russia is
весомый вклад
prepared
в
to
дело
make a significant
всеобъемлющего
contribution
урегулирования
to achieving
палестино-израильского конфликта.
comprehensive settlement of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict.
Рассматриваем попытки
We view
узурпировать
attempts to
внешнее
usurp
сопровождение контактов
the
сторон
external support of
как
the contacts of
контрпродуктивное
parties
и
as
противоречащее
counterproductive
коренным интересам
and
двух
something that
народов.
runs counter to the fundamental interests of the
Считаем в
two
частности
peoples.
деструктивными
We
действия
believe
США,
the US's
заблокировавших все
actions
международные
blocking
форматы сопровождения
all
БВУ
ways to assist the Middle East peace process are particularly destructive,
и пытающихся подменить реальный политический мир экономическим.
desire to change the situation by using economics as destructive to substitute a real
political
peace by an economic one.
Убеждены в
We
крайней
are
опасности
convinced that it is very
попыток
dangerous
продвинуть
to try
арабо-израильскую
to
нормализацию
push forward Arab-Israeli
в
normalization,
обход справедливого решения палестинской
circumventing a
проблемы.
fair solution to the Palestinian problem.
Сожалеем, что эта
We
линия
regret
переносится
that this is something
Вашингтоном
that is being
и на
pushed forward
площадку
by
Совета Безопасности
Washington
ООН,
in the UN Security Council as well,
где США
where
делают
the
все
US
для
is
того,
doing everything it
чтобы
can
не дать принять
to ensure
какие-либо нужные
that
палестинцам
any
решения.
decisions that are necessary for the Palestinians are not taken.
Благодарю за внимание.
Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation and pass the floor to the representative of Gabon.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam President.
Je
I
remercie le
wish to
coordonnateur
thank Special
spécial,
Coordinator Tor Wennesland,
et la commissaire générale
and I
adjointe
thank
de
Deputy
l'UNRWA, Madame Leni
Commissioner
Stenset,
General of
pour leurs
UNRWA,
exposés.
Ms. Lenny
Et je
Stenseth. I
réitère le
thank both
soutien
for
de
their
ma
briefings,
délégation au
and I
coordonnateur
reiterate
spécial.
the support of my delegation for
Je
Special
salue la
Coordinator.
présence parmi
I
nous des
welcome here
représentants
among us
permanents
the
d'Israël,
permanent representative of
du
Israel,
Qatar ainsi que de l'observateur permanent de la Palestine.
of Palestine.
La dégradation de la situation
Deterioration
sécuritaire
of the
tant à
security
Jérusalem,
situation
comme nous
both
avons
in
pu le
Jerusalem, as
constater
we've seen
depuis le début de
since the
cette
beginning
année,
of this year,
que dans la bande
and
de
in
Gaza et
the
aujourd'hui
Gaza
en
Strip, and
Cisjordanie
today in
occupée,
the occupied West
exige une
Bank,
attention particulière du Conseil de
require
sécurité.
that particular attention by the
Le raid
Security Council be
israélien
given
survenu
to
le
the
jeudi
situation.
26
The
janvier
Israeli
dans le
raid,
camp
which occurred on
de
the
réfugiés de
26th
Jenin,
of Thursday, the
ainsi que
26th of January
l'attentat qui
in the
s'en est
refugee
suivi,
camp in Jenin,
ciblant
as
une
well as the
synagogue de
attack which
Jérusalem,
followed,
tous
targeting
deux
a
causant des
synagogue in
pertes en
Jerusalem.
vies humaines et des dizaines de
Both
blessés,
caused the
illustrent
loss
cette
of
escalade
human lives
meurtrière
and
observée depuis le
caused
début du mois de
dozens
janvier
of
2023.
casualties, and both events illustrate
Mon
the
pays
deadly
condamne toutes ces
escalation seen since the beginning of
violences qui
January
font le lit de la souffrance des peuples
2023.
palestiniens
My
et
country condemns
israéliens.
all this violence, which
Nous
paves the way
reconnaissons
for
le
the
droit
suffering
d'Israël
of the
à la
Israeli and
sécurité.
Palestinian people. We
Toutefois,
recognize Israel's right
il
to
est
security.
important de
However, it
respecter
is
le droit
important to
international.
uphold international law.
Dans le même élan,
In the
la
same vein,
multiplicité des
the myriad
démolitions ajoutées à la récente
demolitions,
décision
together with the
de
recent
légaliser
decision
9
taken
colonies en
to legalize
Cisjordanie
9
et de
settlements in the
construire de
West
nouveaux
Bank and
logements dans
to
les
build
colonies
new
existantes
housing units in
constituent des
existing
facteurs
settlements
d'exacerbation
are
des tensions sur le terrain.
factors which exacerbate tensions
Je
on the
voudrais
ground.
également
I also
attirer
wish to
l'attention
draw
du
the
Conseil
Council's
sur la
attention
situation
to the
économique particulièrement
particularly
préoccupante
concerning
de l'autorité
economic
palestinienne,
situation of the
aggravée par le
Palestinian
gel de fonds
Authority.
fiscaux
This
collectés par
situation is
Israël
worsened by the
auprès des
freezing of tax
travailleurs de
revenues
l'autorité
collected
palestinienne
by Israel
pour le
from
compte de cette
Palestinian
dernière.
Authority workers on the
Des
Palestinian
mesures
Authority's
urgentes doivent
behalf.
être prises
Urgent
pour
measures
son
must be
relèvement
taken
économique.
to allow the
Il n'y
Palestinian
aura pas de
Authority's economic
prospérité dans la
recovery.
région
There can
tant que
be
cette
no
prospérité
prosperity
ne
in the
sera pas
region
partagée.
until this
C'est là
prosperity is
aussi un
shared.
des facteurs de la
This
paix
is also
qui doit
one
être
of
pris
the
en compte.
components of peace that
Madame
need
la
to be taken
Présidente,
into
il est
account.
plus que
Madam
jamais
President,
temps
it
d'agir
is
pour la
now more than
désescalade.
ever crucial
Les
to
parties
take
doivent
action
faire
for
preuve de retenue
de-escalation.
et
Parties must
privilégier le
demonstrate
dialogue à travers des
restraint
négociations
and
directes.
prioritize dialogue through
Les pays
direct
de la région,
negotiations. Countries of the
ainsi que ceux
region,
qui
as
ont
well
une
as those that
influence sur
have
les
particular
partis,
influence
doivent
over
redoubler
parties,
d'efforts
must step up
pour
efforts
atteindre cet
to
objectif.
reach this
Le
goal.
cercle
The
infernal
vicious
de
circle
violence
of violence
ne doit pas
last
perdurer et alourdir
and
davantage
must not
le tragique bilan
further
humain,
increase the
matériel,
tragic human,
économique
physical,
et humanitaire de
economic
ce
and
conflit.
humanitarian
Nous
toll of
terminons
this
en
conflict.
soutenant
We
la
conclude by
déclaration
supporting the
présidentielle qui
presidential
a été lue
statement
par
that
Madame la
has been
Présidente.
read
Merci.
by you, Madam
I thank
President.
the
Thank you.
representative of Gabon and pass the floor to the representative of Japan.
Madam President, Japan welcomes the adoption of the PRST as a united message of the Security Council. I thank Special Coordinator Tol Wensland and UNRWA Deputy Commissioner General Leni Stenses for their informative briefings. Since the beginning of this year, there have been a number of developments that risk an escalation of violence in the occupied Palestinian territories. International community has been intensifying its efforts to ease tensions. On our part, at the telephone conversation with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu on 13th February, Prime Minister Kishida expressed concern about the rising tensions between Israel and Palestine and the unilateral measures taken by both sides. It is troubling to witness the deteriorating security situation in the West Bank. The dangerous trajectory of violence from last year continues its alarming trend, including in the recent attack by Israeli forces against a Jenin refugee camp, which led to the highest number of Palestinians killed in a single operation in the West Bank since 2005, according to a report by OCHA. Japan also calls for the reversal of the Israeli government's recent announcement to declare 9 settlement outposts in the occupied West Bank as legal under Israeli law, as well as plans to advance new settlement construction. Israeli settlement activities are in violation of international law and must end immediately. At the same time, we condemn terror attacks in all its forms and manifestations. Recent escalatory actions committed by Palestinians in Jerusalem, such as the terrorist attack outside the synagogue and the car ramming into a bus stop, is deeply deplorable as it only intensifies violence in the area. As the situation surrounding Israel and Palestine witnesses continued clashes and violence, resulting in a number of casualties, Japan calls for refraining from unilateral actions that exacerbate tensions. Madam President, this year marks the 70th anniversary of the Japan-UNRWA partnership. I would like to take this opportunity to reiterate Japan's enduring commitment to assisting UNRWA to ensure that Palestinian refugees continue to receive life-saving assistance and basic services. In conclusion, there is no alternative to direct negotiations between the parties. Japan expresses its strong determination to revive the prospect of a two-state solution and achieve a just, lasting, and comprehensive peace and stability in the Middle East. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Japan and pass the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. And can I join others in starting by thanking Special Coordinator Wennesland and Deputy Commissioner General Ms. Stenseth, not only for your briefings, but also for the work of your teams on the ground. I'd also like to thank members of this Council for our work to come to a consensus on a presidential statement. This statement sets out the international community's continued commitment to a two-state solution based on 1967 lines and urges an end to Israeli settlement activities and the prevention of terrorism. All parties must desist from unilateral measures that further undermine peace, stability, and the two-state solution. President, violence and instability in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories has led to further loss of life. 10 Israelis have been killed in 2 abhorrent terror attacks in 2023. The UK condemns all forms of terror, for which there is no justification. Since the start of the year, 44 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli security forces. This includes 11 children. Israel must exercise maximum restraint in the use of live fire, and the Palestinian Authority must urgently resume full security cooperation and renounce and confront terror. We also condemn the indiscriminate rocket fire from Gaza on the 11th and 12th of February towards civilian populations. This escalating cycle of violence must be brought to an end as swiftly as possible, particularly ahead of upcoming religious festivals. Second, the UK condemns Israel's announcement to legalise 10 outposts and advance up to 10,000 units in settlements in the occupied Palestinian territories. As set out by the British Foreign Secretary and our partners in the Quint statement, the UK strongly opposes these unilateral actions, which exacerbate tensions between Israelis and Palestinians. Settlements and outposts are not only contrary to international law, but they also undermine the prospects for peace. The UK calls on Israel to reverse these decisions. I also condemn increasing settler violence, including the killing of Mithkal Rayan on the 11th of February. Perpetrators of violence must face justice. Thirdly, the UK urges Israel to avoid measures that could amount to collective punishment against Palestinians, particularly punitive demolitions. These cause unnecessary suffering and contribute to the cycle of violence. 4 Palestinians have been killed during punitive demolition operations so far this year. In conclusion, President, restoring stability and securing peace is still possible, but it will require effort from all sides. The UK stands ready to facilitate discussions and dialogue between Israel and the Palestinians and remains firm in its belief that a negotiated two-state solution based on 1967 lines, with Jerusalem as a shared capital, is the only way to ensure a lasting peace, security, and prosperity between the parties. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom and pass the floor to the representative of Mozambique.
Madam President, thank you. Mozambique wishes to thank Mr. Tor Wennesland, the Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process, and Ms. Leni Stenset, Deputy Commissioner General for UNRWA, for their comprehensive briefings on the current situation in the region. We reiterate our full support to their efforts towards a just and durable peace in the region and to the well-being of the Palestinian people. Madam President, we note that since last time the Council considered the issue before us, the Palestinian question has registered no progress. On the contrary, the vicious cycle of violence tends to grow at an alarming pace. In this connection, we wish to reiterate our strong support for the presidential statement just read out by the President of the Council this morning. We continue to express our deep concern over the unilateral actions and excessive use of force by the Israeli government against refugees in Jenin, including women and children. We hold the view that both peoples of Israel and Palestine deserve a peaceful and prosperous life and future. They should be able, in the words of the Charter, to practice tolerance and live together in peace with one another as good neighbors. In this context, we wish to once again underline that construction and expansion of settlements are totally contrary to international law, and they undermine the prospects of peace and the Palestinian state. We urge all the contending parties to exercise restraint, to halt all acts of provocation and hostility in order to allow for favorable conditions that can lead to the resumption of the long-stalled direct dialogue between Palestinians and Israelis. We welcome the efforts by international partners aimed at exerting positive influence for the respect of the rule of law and democracy in Palestine by creating the necessary conditions for the holding of presidential and legislative elections in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. We wish to reiterate our urgent and strong appeal for an increased, predictable, and sustainable support for the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian refugees in the Near East, as well as for the World Food Programme. Such support will allow these organizations to alleviate the human suffering and ensure some level of dignity to the refugees and internally displaced people in the region. Madam President, Security Council resolutions 242 of 1967 and 2334 of 2016, among others, as well as various General Assembly resolutions and decisions, form the political and legal basis for a two-state solution. Therefore, our efforts towards peace in the region must go in line with these deliberations. We must continue encouraging the parties to pursue this way. We strongly urge Israelis and Palestinians to work together in a constructive manner in order to lay the groundwork for a lasting peace based on the idea of immediate and full materialization of the right to self-determination of the Palestinian people and the right to existence of the State of Israel. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Mozambique and pass the floor to the representative of France.
Madame la Présidente,
Madam President, I would like to thank the Special Coordinator
et la
for
Commissaire
the Middle East,
générale
His
adjointe
Process and the Deputy
pour leurs
Commissioner
exposés.
General for their briefings.
Je salue l'adoption de la déclaration
I welcome the adoption
présidentielle.
of
Il
the
était
PRST.
important
It was
que ce
important
Conseil
for the
puisse
Council
s'exprimer unanimement au
to
sujet des
express
récentes
itself
mesures
unanimously
unilatérales
regarding the
et qu'il
recent
puisse
unilateral
rappeler
measures
son attachement à
so
la
that
solution
it
des deux
can
États.
reiterate its
Madame la
commitment to the
Présidente, j'aurai
two-state solutions.
aujourd'hui
Madam
trois
President, I
messages.
have three
Premièrement, les
messages to convey
récentes
today.
annonces israéliennes
Firstly, the
sont
recent
autant de pas
Israeli
vers une annexion de la zone
announcements
C.
are more steps
La
towards
France
an
rappelle sa
annexation
ferme
of Area C.
condamnation de la
France
politique de
reiterates that it
colonisation
strongly condemns
israélienne.
Israel's
Cette
settlement
politique nous éloigne
policy. This
davantage
policy moves us further
de la
away from the
perspective de la
prospect
solution à
of the
deux États.
two-state
La France est
solution.
très
France
préoccupée
is
par
very
l'annonce
concerned by
du gouvernement
the
israélien de
Israeli
son
government's
intention de faire
announcement
progresser
of
des
its
plans en vue de la
intention to
construction
push
de près
forward
de 10 000
plans
unités de
to
logement
build
dans les
around
colonies et
10,000
d'entamer
housing
un
units
processus de
in
légalisation
settlements
de 9
and start a
avant-postes,
process to
considérés
authorize
précédemment comme
9
contrevenant au droit
outposts
israélien.
that were previously
Ces
considered
mesures
as running
unilatérales
counter
sont
to Israeli
contraires au droit
law.
international
These
et
unilateral
notamment à
measures
plusieurs
run counter to
résolutions du
international
Conseil de
law and in particular
sécurité,
to
comme la résolution
several
2334.
Security
Nous nous y
Council
opposons
resolutions,
fermement
including
et appelons les autorités israéliennes à
2334.
revenir sur leurs
We
décisions.
firmly are
Leur
opposed
mise
to
en
this
œuvre
and call
ferait
upon
courir
the
le
Israeli
risque d'une
authorities
annexion
to revisit their
progressive de la zone
decision.
C
Their
en
implementation would
Cisjordanie.
run the risk of a
Or,
progressive
dans les
annexation
territoires
of Area
palestiniens
C
comme
and
partout
in the
ailleurs, la
West Bank,
France ne reconnaîtra jamais
Palestinian
l'annexion illégale de territoire.
territories.
Nous sommes
In
aussi
the
très
Palestinian
inquiets
territories,
face aux
rather,
violences
as elsewhere in France,
croissantes
France will
perpétrées par
never
les colons
recognize the illegal
que nous
annexation of
condamnons et qui
territories.
visent autant les Palestiniens
We
que
are
la
very
société
worried
civile
by increasing
israélienne.
violence
Les
and
responsables de ces violences doivent
carried out by
répondre de leurs
settlers that we
actes.
condemn and
La France
target
rappelle
Palestinians
son
and
attachement au respect
Israeli
du
civil
droit
society. The
international
perpetrators must
humanitaire
be
et à
held
l'impératif
accountable.
de
France reiterates
protection
its
des
commitment
civils
to
dans les
the respect for
territoires
IHL
occupés
and the need to
qui
protect
incombent à
civilians
Israël.
in occupied
Deuxièmement,
territories. This is
face à une
incumbent upon
situation
Israel.
hautement
Secondly,
inflammable, notre Conseil
faced
doit
with
tout
this
faire
highly
pour éviter
inflammatory
une
situation, the
escalade.
Security Council must do it
Comme l'a
all
indiqué le
it can
coordonnateur
to
spécial,
avoid
ce
an
début
escalation
d'année est
on the
marqué
ground.
par un niveau de
As the
violence
Special
très
Coordinator
élevé dans les
pointed out,
territoires
this
palestiniens
beginning of the
occupés, et
year has been
notamment à
marked
Jérusalem
by a
Est.
very high level of
Ce
violence
cycle de
in the occupied
violence est
Palestinian territories, and in
insoutenable,
particular in East
tant pour les
Jerusalem. This
Palestiniens que pour les
cycle of
Israéliens,
violence
et il
is
doit prendre
unsustainable
fin.
both for the Palestinians
Comme
and
le
for the
président
Israelis
Macron
and
l'a
must be
dit
brought to
au
an
Premier
end.
ministre
As President
israélien
Macron
le 3
said to
février
the Israeli
dernier,
Prime
la
Minister
France
during
condamne
his visit to Paris
avec
on the 3rd of
fermeté
February,
les attaques
France
terroristes
strongly
commises au
condemns
cours des
the
dernières
terrorist attacks
semaines qui ont
committed
coûté
over
la vie à
recent
plusieurs
weeks that have
civils,
killed
dont des
several
enfants.
civilians, including
Notre
children.
attachement
Our
indéfectible à la sécurité
unwavering
d'Israël est connu.
commitment to
Les
Israel's security
Israéliens
is
comme
well
les
known.
Palestiniens ont le droit de vivre en
Israelis,
paix et en
like
sécurité.
Palestinians,
La
should
France
live
appelle les
or have the
parties à la
right rather to
retenue
live in
et
peace
à
and security.
s'abstenir de toute action
France calls upon
susceptible d'être
all
perçue comme
parties
une
to demonstrate
provocation
restraint
dans
and
le
to
contexte
abstain
actuel.
from all actions
Madame
that
la
might be
Présidente,
perceived
ce
as a
cycle de
provocation
violence
in the current context.
s'explique avant
Madam
tout par l'absence
This cycle of
totale
violence
d'horizon
primarily is
politique.
explained by
La
a
France appelle
complete
donc
absence
l'ensemble
of
des membres
political
de ce
prospects.
Conseil,
France
ainsi
calls,
que les États de la
therefore,
région, à
upon all the
contribuer
members of the Council, as
activement
well as the
à la
states of the
relance des
region,
efforts de
to
paix.
actively contribute to the
Et elle se
resumption
tient
of
prête pour
peace
sa part à y
efforts.
contribuer.
It stands ready to do what
La
it can
communauté
to
internationale
contribute to
doit
this. The
enfin, et
international
c'est mon
community
troisième point, se
must, and this
mobiliser
is my
pour
third and
soutenir
final point,
l'UNRWA.
rally to
La
support
France
UNRWA.
soutient l'agence qui
France
joue un rôle
fully
crucial
supports UNRWA. This
depuis
plays a
1949
crucial
pour
role and has
aider
done so
les
since
réfugiés palestiniens.
1949 in helping
Nous avons
Palestinian refugees.
contribué à hauteur de
We contributed
33,5 millions d'euros en
33.5 million
2022
euros in
et continuerons cette année.
2022, and
La
we will
communauté
continue to do
internationale
so
doit
this
se
year. The international
mobiliser
community
pour que
must
l'UNRWA
mobilize
puisse poursuivre
so
ses
that UNRWA can
activités
continue its activities.
dont dépend la vie
The
de nombreux
life of
réfugiés
numerous
palestiniens.
Palestinian
La
refugees
plupart d'entre eux
depends
vivent
on
sous le
this.
seuil
Most
de
of them live
pauvreté
below
et
the
font
poverty
face
line
à de nouveaux
and
défis,
face new
notamment
challenges,
le
in
récent
particular the
tremblement de
recent
terre en Syrie.
earthquake
Nous
in
appelons
Syria.
tous les
We
États
would
membres à
urge
contribuer
all member states to contribute
financièrement à ces
financially
activités en
to its activities
2023
in
et notamment les pays
2023
de la région.
and in particular
Je vous
countries
remercie.
in the region. Thank you.
I thank the representative of France and pass the floor to the representative of Switzerland.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you,
Je
Madam
souhaite également me
President.
joindre à
I, too,
d'autres
wish
et
to
remercier
echo
le coordinateur
other speakers
spécial
and
Tor
thank the special
Wennesland
coordinator
et la
Tor
commissaire
Wennesland
générale adjointe
and
Leni
Deputy Commissioner
Steinsetz
General
pour leur
Leni Steinsetz
présentation
for their
et pour leur
briefings
travail.
and for their work.
La Suisse salue les
Switzerland
échanges de ces
welcomes
derniers
the
jours entre les
exchanges held in
parties
recent days between
qui
the
visent à
parties.
promouvoir
These
une
aim to
désescalade.
promote de-escalation.
Préoccupés par
We
la
are concerned by
détérioration
the
de la
deterioration
situation
of the security
sécuritaire
situation
et par le
and
risque
by
réel
the
d'engrenage,
real risk of
nous nous
escalation.
félicitons que
As
le
such,
Conseil de
we welcome the fact
sécurité
that
soit
the
parvenu
Security
aujourd'hui
Council has
à
today
formuler par
managed
consensus
to
une
find
déclaration
consensus on a
présidentielle que nous
presidential
soutenons
statement.
pleinement.
We fully support that
La Suisse
PRST.
reste pourtant inquiète de
Switzerland,
l'annonce
however,
faite par
remains
le gouvernement
concerned by the
israélien le
announcement
12
made by the Israeli
février
government
de
on the 12th
construire
of
près de
February
10
to
000
build
nouveaux
nearly
logements dans des
10,000 new
colonies
housing units
et de
in
légaliser
settlements and to
rétroactivement 10
retroactively
avant-postes en
legalize
territoire
10
palestinien
outposts in the
occupé.
occupied Palestinian
Nous
territory.
appelons
We
Israël à
call upon
renoncer à ces
Israel
mesures
to desist from
unilatérales
these
qui risquent
unilateral
encore
measures. These
d'exacerber
unilateral
les
measures
tensions
risk
et
further
mettent en
exacerbating
danger une
tensions
solution
and
négociée
in
à deux
danger
États.
a negotiated two-state
Cela
solution.
comprend également la
This
démolition
also
du
includes
village de
the
Khan
demolition of the
al-Ahmar,
village of
situé
Khan
dans une
al-Ahmar,
zone stratégique
located in a
nécessaire à la
strategic area
continuité du territoire
necessary
palestinien.
for the
La Suisse
contiguity of
appelle
the
la
Palestinian
puissance
territory.
occupante à
Switzerland calls
respecter
upon
ses
the occupying
obligations
power to
en vertu du droit
respect its
international humanitaire,
obligations under
y
international
compris à
humanitarian law,
délivrer les permis de
including by
construire
issuing
à la
building
population
permits to the
palestinienne.
Palestinian population.
Nous condamnons les
We
attaques à
condemn
l'encontre des
the
civils en
attacks
territoire
against
palestinien
civilians in the occupied
occupé,
Palestinian
ainsi que
territory.
les
We
attaques
also
de ces
condemn
dernières
attacks in
semaines
recent
dans des
weeks in
colonies à
settlements in
Jérusalem-Est.
East Jerusalem.
La Suisse attend des
Switzerland
parties qu'elles
expects
respectent
the
leurs
parties
obligations
to
de droit
respect their
international et
obligations under
renforcent les
international
mesures pour
law
protéger
and
les
to
civils.
strengthen measures
La
to
prévention de
protect
ces
civilians.
violences passe également par la
Moreover,
reddition de comptes.
accountability is also
Face à
essential to
l'augmentation
prevent
des
such
besoins
violence. The
humanitaires dans la
increasing
région,
humanitarian
les
needs
services
in
de
the region
l'UNRWA
make
sont d'autant
UNRWA's
plus essentiels
services all the
aujourd'hui.
more essential
En
today.
fournissant ces
By
services
providing
sanitaires,
these health,
éducatifs ou de filets
education
sociaux,
and social safety
l'UNRWA
net
apporte une
services, UNRWA is
contribution
making a
significative à la
significant
stabilité dans la
contribution to
région.
stability in the
Il est
region.
fondamental
It
que
is
l'UNRWA
vital
puisse
that UNRWA
continuer à
continue
fournir une aide
to
efficace,
provide
efficiente
effective
et dans
and
le
efficient
respect des
assistance
principes
and
humanitaires,
can do so
dont
in
la
accordance
neutralité.
with humanitarian
À cette fin, la
principles,
Suisse
including
appelle à un
neutrality.
soutien
To this
financier
end, Switzerland
adéquat
calls
et
for
prévisible
adequate
de
and
l'agence.
predictable financial
Madame la
support to be
Présidente,
extended
dans
to
le
the
contexte
agency.
actuel
Madam
volatile,
President, in
la
the
Suisse
current volatile
s'inquiète de
context,
l'affaiblissement
Switzerland is
croissant
concerned
de
about the
l'autorité
increasing
palestinienne,
weakening of
y
the
compris en
Palestinian
raison des
Authority,
mesures prises par
including
Israël.
as a result of measures
La Suisse
taken by
réitère son
Israel.
appel à la tenue
Switzerland
d'élections
reiterates
sur
its
tout le
call for
territoire
elections to be
palestinien,
held throughout
y
the
compris
Palestinian territory,
Jérusalem-Est. C'est une
including
étape
East Jerusalem.
indispensable
This
pour la
is a
restauration
crucial
de la
step for the
légitimité des
restoration
institutions,
of institutions'
ainsi que le
legitimacy,
rétablissement de
as
l'unité
well as for the the
politique
re-establishment
essentielle
of the
à une
political
solution
unity
à deux
vital
États.
for a two-state
À
solution.
quelques semaines des fêtes religieuses
With
de
the
Ramadan,
religious holidays
Pessah et
of
Pâques,
Ramadan,
nous
Pesach, and
réitérons
Easter
notre
just
appel
weeks
à toutes
away,
les
we
parties
reiterate
de
our call upon
s'engager
all
activement
parties to
pour le
actively
strict respect du
engage to
statu quo
ensure stringent
historique sur le
adherence
Haram
to
al-Sharif,
the
nom
historic
du
status
temple
quo
à
on
Jérusalem.
the Haram al-Sharif Temple
Empêcher
Mount
de
in
nouvelles pertes
Jerusalem.
de vies humaines et
Preventing further loss of
inverser les
human life and
tendances
reversing
négatives sur le
negative trends
terrain
on the
reste
ground
prioritaire.
remains a priority.
La Suisse est prête à
Switzerland is
soutenir les
ready
efforts
to
de paix
support peace
visant à
efforts aimed
restaurer
at
un horizon
restoring a
politique
political
basé sur
horizon
une
based
solution
on
à
a
deux États,
two-state
y
solution,
compris avec ses
including
bons
with
offices.
its good
Je vous
offices.
remercie.
I thank you.
Switzerland, and pass the floor to the representative of China.
Madam President, I thank Special Coordinator Wennesland I also would like to thank Council members for their warnings on the issue of on the question of Palestine. I thank Special Coordinator Wennesland and Deputy Commissioner General Stenseth for their briefings. For some time now, the Palestinian-Israeli relations have continued to be tense. The unilateral actions by Israel keep escalating, pushing the situation to the brink of spinning out of control. We note with concern that the violence in the West Bank has been intensifying. Search and arrest operations, settler violence, and incidents of clashes and attacks have continued to cause serious civilian casualties, including children. The solemnity and sanctity of Jerusalem's holy sites have been repeatedly violated. Their historical status quo frequently challenged. Provocative acts and inflammatory words of all kinds have continued to intensify conflict and confrontation. What's more, Israel keeps advancing its settlement activities, and earlier this month, it announced its decision to legalize 9 West Bank outposts and its plan to build 10,000 settlement units, causing widespread condemnation and concern. These negative developments run counter to the international law and Security Council resolutions, to the repeated calls by all parties to de-escalate the situation, and to the efforts by the international community to preserve the two-state solution. At this critical moment, Council members, upon the initiative of the UAE, conducted in the past few days intensive consultations on a draft resolution and reached broad consensus. As the Council is getting ready to adopt the resolution, we finally see relevant parties' efforts at emergency diplomatic mediation. According to media reports, Israel promised yesterday that it would suspend unilateral actions that would undoubtedly undermine the prospect of the two-state solution. It must be pointed out that the vitality of a diplomatic promise depends on its implementation. Now is definitely not the time to breathe a sigh of relief. The international community, including the countries with major influences, should keep their attention, increase the level of commitment, and play in earnest a constructive role to ensure that Israel does implement its promise on the ground. At the same time, more should be done. After the promised suspension, Israel should not conduct another round of unilateral activities. Instead, it should completely change its course and truly return to the right track of the two-state solution. The presidential statement just adopted by the Council is a major step to manage this current crisis. It also shows the determination and willingness of the vast majority of members in maintaining the right direction of the two-state solution and its implementation. China commends the leadership demonstrated by the UAE. The Council should be ready to take meaningful actions whenever necessary to shoulder its charter responsibilities. Madam President, just now, Deputy Commissioner General Stenseth introduced UNRWA's work for Palestinian refugees. The Palestinian refugees represent one of the earliest, largest, and most protracted refugee situations in the world. The critical services delivered by the agency, such as education, healthcare, and social assistance, have ensured the basic livelihood of the Palestinian refugees, demonstrating the international community's solidarity with them and fulfilling the international community's common responsibility toward them. China fully recognizes and highly commends UNRWA's work. In recent years, the alarm of fiscal crisis for UNRWA has been triggered time and again, which implies that the situation of the Palestinian refugees keeps getting worse and their humanitarian needs growing. We call on Israel to stop demolition of the homes and schools of the refugees and its blockade of the Gaza Strip, and cease creating trouble for UNRWA in fulfilling its mandate. Next year marks the 75th anniversary of UNRWA. The agency's work has been going on non-stop for over 70 years. This also means that the Palestinian question has yet to be solved after over 70 years. Faced with such protracted injustice and suffering, the international community should conduct serious reflections and correct its mistakes without delay. Among other things, it should break away from piecemeal crisis management and promote a comprehensive, just, and durable solution for the Palestinian question. The Palestinian people are eagerly waiting for the day when their homeland is no longer occupied, when an independent and sovereign state of Palestine lives side by side with Israel while enjoying common security and development. Making sure that the day comes as soon as possible is our common responsibility. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of China and pass the floor to the representative of Albania.
Thank you, Madam President, and I thank the Special Coordinator, Winnisland, and Deputy Commissioner General Stenseth for their briefing. It is unfortunate to note that since our last meeting, the situation on the ground has not improved. Instead, the overall climate has further worsened. The absence of a political horizon looms large and continues to directly affect the safety and security of both Israelis and Palestinians on a daily basis, by dimming hopes for a peaceful, comprehensive solution to the conflict. Colleagues, we are appalled by the terrorist attacks on Israel and deplore the loss of innocent life in Jerusalem. We condemn them strongly and unequivocally. The use of terror acts, glorification of terror, incitement to violence, hate speech of any kind, including anti-Semitism, are deplorable, unacceptable, and must stop. We are also deeply worried by the worsening situation in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. We reiterate our position that the expansion of settlements is wrong and must stop. Equally, violence against Palestinian people, the eviction and the demolition of their private properties cannot become a standard practice in breach of international humanitarian law. In this context of alarming heightened tensions, the key word is de-escalation. Both parties must engage without delay to de-escalate, resume security cooperation, since without breaking the spiral of violence, more innocent people will be harmed, and the already huge divide between the parties will only grow. There should not be another deadly year for the civilians, the children, innocent women and youth of Israel and Palestine. The death toll of the past happenings is already dreadful. We will not tire repeating. Parties must withdraw from unilateral steps and actions that erode trust, fuel tension, breed violence with the known consequences over and over again. If there were one aspect the longest crisis of modern history has already confirmed, it is that one-sided measures have never been helpful and have never contributed to peace efforts. They only trigger animosity between sides, bringing more insecurity and instability not only for those concerned, but also volatility for the entire region. This is why we welcome the PRST adopted this morning and the active efforts deployed during the last days, and hope that they will serve as a reflection on the need to find other and better ways and by common consent to address concerns. Madam President, next month, believers from the three monotheistic religions will observe their yearly rituals based on the values of family, charity, and respect for others. It is a moment of profound reflection and spiritual fulfillment, and everything must be in place for people to exercise their freedom of religion and belief in the most peaceful and harmonious manner ever. The peaceful religious coexistence is a core contribution to the comprehensive peace in the Middle East. In this vein, Albania would like to reiterate the special significance of the respect of the status quo of the holy places, as well as expressing support for the special role of custodianship of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan in this regard. Let me conclude, Madam President, by reaffirming Albania's full support for a just negotiated two-state solution, which would make it possible that a secure and safe Israel lives side by side in peace and security with a viable and democratic Palestinian state, with Jerusalem as the future shared capital. Let's not forget, nothing can be built without hope. Nothing is possible without continued and genuine efforts, and nothing is sustainable without trust. This is what is needed to keep violence away, to foment change and make sure that both Israelis and Palestinians live as neighbors in safety and security and enjoying freedom, dignity, justice, and the benefits of democracy. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Albania and pass the floor to the representative of the United Arab Emirates.
Madam President, I thank Special Coordinator Wensland for his thorough briefing and his constant efforts in pursuit of peace between Israel and Palestine. I also thank Deputy Commissioner General Stenseth for her valuable remarks. The UAE is grateful to Council members for their constructive approach towards the successful adoption of today's presidential statement, the first decision on this file in over 6 years. It is especially important that the Council is united and unequivocal in affirming that continued Israeli settlement activity dangerously imperils the two-state solution. We also welcome the text's strong emphasis on the protection of civilians and counterterrorism. After a year in which escalating provocations, tension, and violence further eroded the prospects of a two-state solution, the Council's reiteration of its unwavering commitment to the vision of an independent Palestine living side by side with Israel in peace is absolutely necessary. Still, the past few weeks illustrate the potential consequences of the continued lack of a credible peace process. We cannot go on mistaking the absence of a breakdown for a sustainable status quo. The sustained deterioration of conditions on the ground will require a far more concerted effort by the parties and indeed this Council. As we discuss ways to promote and sustain constructive engagement, I would like to stress 3 points. First, de-escalation is key. This must include reversing, in addition to suspending, unilateral actions such as settlement activities, which undermine the prospects for a two-state solution and which constitute a clear violation of international law and of this Council's resolutions. Second, this is a time for political and moral leadership, in particular by refusing to yield further ground to extremism in all its forms. This is critical as the followers of the 3 Abrahamic religions will be celebrating the holy month of Ramadan, Passover, and Easter in the coming weeks. The holiday period has too often been marred by avoidable violence. The UAE is firm in our condemnation and rejection of all forms of Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, and Christianophobia, and we call for the respect of all religious sites, including mosques, churches, and synagogues. In light of the alarming rise in extremist hate speech and incitement, it is vital that the Security Council has addressed these issues for the first time in a product. We reaffirm the need to maintain the historical and legal status quo of the city of Jerusalem and its holy sites. The UAE stresses, once again, the need to respect the Hashemite custodianship of the holy sites as expressive of the special role of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. Third, the demolition of Palestinian property must stop. According to OCHA, 155 demolitions took place between 1st of January and 12th of February alone, 28% of them in East Jerusalem. Those are not just statistics. Behind each of these 155 demolitions are uprooted families, destroyed livelihoods, and communities scarred by the ensuing violence and dislocation. We once again underscore to all parties the need to abide by their responsibilities under international law, including international humanitarian law, especially regarding the protection of civilians. Madam President, the Security Council's responsibility in this conflict cannot be reduced to a last resort effort to prevent a complete breakdown. This body must revitalize its role as the international custodian of the two-state solution, where an independent Palestinian state built on the 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital lives side by side with Israel in peace, security, and mutual recognition. That requires actively facilitating a return to direct final status talks. What hangs in the balance is nothing short than the legitimate hopes and aspirations of nearly 15 million people, Israelis and Palestinians, to normal, peaceful, stable, secure, and prosperous lives. Thank you, Madam President.
Emirates. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of Malta. I would like to thank Special Coordinator Wennesland and Deputy Commissioner General Stenseth for their insightful briefings. I also recognize the presence of the observer state of Palestine, of Israel and Qatar. I am also pleased that the Council has acted in a united manner and adopted a PRST this morning. We continue to monitor with deep concern the latest developments in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The significance of maintaining calm and avoiding unilateral inflammatory actions by all parties cannot be overstated. The resumption of dialogue and coordination between parties on the ground, including security cooperation, is essential for this conflict not to escalate further. In the context of a stalled peace process, Malta strongly reiterates its commitment to a just and comprehensive resolution of the Middle East conflict based on a two-state solution along the pre-1967 borders, addressing the legitimate aspirations of both sides, with Jerusalem as the future capital of two states living side by side in peace and security, in line with all relevant UNSC resolutions and internationally agreed parameters. Settlement activities are a clear violation of international law and Security Council resolutions and an obstacle to peace. The recent decision by the Israeli government to advance settlement units and to legalize, under Israeli law, settlement outposts in the occupied West Bank moves us further away from a viable two-state solution. We call on Israeli authorities to halt settlement expansion and to reverse the latest decisions. We also remain concerned at the growing incidence of demolitions, forced evictions, and related settler violence in the occupied Palestinian territories. At the same time, Malta underlines the importance for the Palestinian Authority to organize the postponed national elections without further delay. We are encouraged by the signing of the Algiers Declaration of October 2022 and continue to urge the Palestinian factions to engage in good faith in the reconciliation process. Malta also calls for the rebroadening of support and a safe, enabling environment for Palestinian civil society to be actively engaged in the peace process. In 2023, we have continued to witness violence with casualties suffered by both sides. The protection of civilians must be ensured at all times. Whilst recognizing Israel's legitimate right to defend itself against any attacks, Malta underlines that any operation must be proportionate and in line with international humanitarian law. We equally condemn the terrorist attacks committed against Israel. The status quo must not be allowed to continue. Both parties must find a way to engage in a meaningful dialogue that aims for the creation of two states living side by side. This is the only path that can lead to a long-term de-escalation. Malta is deeply troubled that a number of victims of violence, especially the marked increase in incidents involving children, including acts of terror. In this vein, SRSG for Children and Armed Conflict also underscored the disproportionate impact of the conflict on children following her recent visit to Israel and the OPT. Malta echoes her call for all parties to establish measures which ensure the protection of all Palestinian and Israeli children. We cannot mention the plight of children without commending UNRWA's role as a pillar of support to Palestinian refugees in the region. We also welcome UNRWA's tireless provision of schooling to over 500,000 children and the maintenance of operation of hundreds of schools for Palestinian refugees. We equally condemn actions of any party that seek to bring the agency's reputation into doubt. UNRWA remains the strongest pillar of support and humanitarian aid for the Palestinian people and the stabilizing force in the region. Malta reiterates its call for severely needed international financial support for the agency to ensure the realization of its new strategic plan. There is no alternative to a negotiated two-state solution. It is important to reverse the negative cycle of violence and to avoid any future loss of life. We underscore that a recommitment to the peace process by all parties is imperative. Restoring stability and securing peace, which safeguards the lives of Palestinian and Israeli people, should continue to guide our efforts. I resume now my function as President of the Council. I now give the floor to the Permanent Observer of the Observer State of Palestine.
Madam President, allow me at the outset to congratulate Malta on assuming the presidency of the Council. We share with you your country's deep bonds of friendship and common values. It is befitting for the Council to be meeting and adopting a presidential statement under your presidency. Allow me also to thank the Special Coordinator and UNRWA's Deputy Commissioner General for their briefings. UNRWA's work is extremely important. It should be maintained, protected, and financed. Allow me finally to express our appreciation to the Arab group represented by my sister, the Ambassador of Qatar, for joining this important meeting. Madam President, 2023 is still young, but an old wound continues to bleed. Many may feel watching the news coming from Palestine that this is more of the same, that we have been here before, that it is tragic, but it is what it is. But this is not any moment in time, and while the killing, the pain, the displacement, the demolitions are the same, we are fast approaching a breaking point that no one should care to explore. It is mounting, with every child killed, with every house demolished, with every family displaced. In between current headlines, you may miss it. But for those who know our region or who have visited it recently, it is obvious, glaring, and undeniable. One of the signs is an acceleration of events. The deadliest year for Palestinians in the West Bank that has gone by may well be surpassed by the deadliest year underway. All the ingredients are there for us to reach a point of no return. I do not agree with those who say we have already crossed it, as we do not have the luxury of fatalism. Every action we take now matters. Every word we utter matters. Every decision we delay matters. Many may feel, watching the news coming from Palestine, that this is more of the same, but for the mother who lost her child or fears for the ones still alive, for the family that can find no safety in the sanctity of its home, for the millions who endured dispossession, displacement, and denial of the rights, the pain hits different each time. Do not become numb as a Security Council, combined and each nation. Do not grow accustomed. Do not accept defeat. Our people will not. They will not accept coexistence with oppression and occupation. Humanity has elaborated rules. This Council has adopted resolutions. This global community has endorsed a vision. They should not relinquish them. They must defend them. You must defend them. The year is still young, but Israel persists in pursuing old recipes with no longer hidden objectives: colonizations and annexation, and with predictable implications: gross human rights abuses, human suffering, violence, and instability. This Israeli government has announced its unlawful plan and is acting upon it. It is time for the international community to announce its own plan in defense of international law and to act upon it. It's time for you to act. You cannot remain paralyzed. This international plan should start with Jerusalem, where Israelis' colonial and discriminatory policies are finding their ultimate expression, where Israelis' announced annexation 43 years ago continues to be met with defiance by the Palestinian people as a whole and Jerusalemites in particular, where Israel, hoping through collective punishment and political, geographical suffocation to subdue our people. Of course, to no avail. In this connection, let me say a few words in Arabic. لن ينجحوا في كسر إرادة شعبنا الفلسطيني العظيم وخاصة في القدس الشريف.
In particular in Jerusalem.
وأهلنا الأبطال
They cannot
الصامدين فيها اليوم
make our
ودائما
citizens
وأحييهم من هذا المنبر
cave. They are resisting today. I commend our citizens from this rostrum. I commend them. I share my full solidarity with them.
رؤوسنا ورؤوسهم عالية.
Those people who keep their heads up high and allow them to keep their heads held high. For us, they are our medal of honor. They are the very example of our determination and our dignity.
The international mobilization we have witnessed the last few days must be sustained and amplified. The Council today expressed yet again its clear opposition to these policies in a unified and unequivocal manner. In the first presidential statement it adopts on Palestine in almost a decade. While we condemn in the strongest terms this illegal unilateral settlement policy and practice, many countries, many of you, have expressed condemnations of this illegal act as well. I seize this opportunity to thank the UAE and my sister Lana for putting forward this presidential statement and all its efforts towards its adoption, and Council members for their engagement and support. The Council has thus confirmed once again its long-standing positions in no uncertain terms. This message has to be pressed on, translated into a time-bound action plan, a concerted effort by the UN and its member states to set us on a different path, one that leads to freedom, justice, and peace. Every action we take now matters Every word we utter matters. Every decision we adopt matters. We do not have the luxury of fatalism. The Palestinian people deserve freedom and an end to the historic injustice of the Nakba they endured 70 years ago, and that is still ongoing today. All peoples in our region and beyond deserve to live in peace. Freedom, not occupation. Coexistence, not supremacy. Peace, not apartheid. And I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of the permanent observer of the Observer State of Palestine for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Israel.
Thank you, Madam President. Daddy gave me a present, a machine gun and a rifle. When I am big, I will join the Liberation Army. The Liberation Army taught us how to defend our homeland. We will achieve victory over America and Israel. A few weeks ago, Amal, a young Palestinian girl, recited this moving poem on air, and it was publicly broadcasted on an official Palestinian Authority TV channel. Tragically, little Amal is only one of countless other youth the Palestinian Authority has indoctrinated to hate and murder. The Palestinian Authority runs a monstrous propaganda campaign that would make Goebbels and Hitler very proud. They poison the minds of generations, teaching them that violently murdering Jews means infinite glory. They are taught from a young age that the Jewish state has no right to exist. Their evil seeps into kindergartens, educating that martyrdom is the only way. You can see this with your own eyes, yet none of the dismay and concern expressed in your joint statement is directed towards this Palestinian incitement. The Palestinian Authority is a terrorist entity that in 2022 alone rewarded killers and their families with $175 million for killing Israelis, to the attention of the representative of UNRWA, if you need money. You are all familiar with the Palestinians' pay-for-slay system, yet you are willing to let it continue without condemnation. The Palestinian Authority under Arafat, and today under the malicious President Abbas, has incentivized the murder of innocent Israelis while rejecting every peace agreement that has been brought to the table. These are the facts. Distinguished council members, you all understand that the Palestinian Authority's support and incentivization of terror are the most fundamental breaches of the agreements and international law, and they are the main roadblocks to peace. Until Palestinian children are no longer brainwashed to hate and murder Israelis, sadly, blood will still spill needlessly in our region. The Palestinians' most integral commitment was their obligation to combat terror. Yet today, the Palestinian Authority not only refuses to take real action to prevent terrorism, it actively, for many years now, stokes the flames of violence. By glorifying terrorists and paying them money, the PA is breeding a culture of hatred and evil, which makes reconciliation impossible. The evidence is irrefutable. The Palestinian culture of hate and terror is real. How can this council justify ignoring it and never addressing it? And despite the horrific acts of Palestinian terror carried out over the past weeks, the Holocaust-distorting Abbas refused to even issue one word of condemnation, not even one word. After innocent Jewish worshippers were murdered outside a synagogue, while President Abbas continued to say nothing, Fatah officials, his party, praised the attack. As candies, we all saw the photos, the pictures, as candies were being distributed to crowds of Palestinians celebrating the dead Jews, Atta Abu Rumeileh, the Fatah secretary of Jenin, referred to the attack a heroic operation. Where is your concern and dismay for these celebrations of murder? Where are they? You know, it is not by chance that Haj Amin al-Husseini and the Palestinian leadership at the time were close allies of Hitler and later led the rejection of the UN partition plan in 1947. Nothing has changed since then. The Palestinians' main goal has remained the same: to prevent the existence of a Jewish state. It is difficult to understand what this council truly expects Israel to do while faced with a terror authority that constantly strives for our delegitimization and that has lost control in much of its areas, of course including Gaza, to Hamas, a designated terror organization. Distinguished council members, you sit here only expressing concerns and dismay for Israel's response to Palestinian terror, while the most significant violator of any agreement sits right here across from me. How did the Palestinians achieve the status of an observer state? Are you not aware that the Palestinians committed to not taking any unilateral steps to change their status without negotiations and agreement? They violated all the agreements, despite not meeting even the most basic necessary requirements. How many times has this violation been condemned here in this council? 0. This institution is merely another means for the Palestinians to unilaterally try to impose their twisted demands on Israel without any negotiations or dialogue, in order to bring about Israel's destruction. Israel will not complacently come to terms with another terror entity on our borders that aims to obliterate us. We will never accept this. Over the past weeks, the State of Israel has been mourning the deaths of 11 recent victims of terror and dozens injured. Civilians, not terrorists. Yet, shockingly, we are not here today to condemn the Palestinian acts of terror that led to this loss of life. This meeting was once again initiated to condemn Israel, this time for issuing building permits in already existing communities. Already existing. Building permits in our homeland spark international uproar, while dead Jewish children elicit nothing. This is an utter disgrace. You are all aware of the huge extent of illegal Palestinian construction throughout Area C in Judea and Samaria, in flagrant violation of international agreements. You can see it on the ground. Why is this never discussed by the Council? Today's meeting should have been wholly dedicated to the innocent Israelis recently murdered. But seeing as this Council preferred to focus elsewhere, I ask that the minimum respect be paid to the victims and their memory. Ilya Susensky, Shaul Chai, Irina Korolova, and Rafael Ben Eliyahu, murdered in cold blood by a Palestinian terrorist as they were exiting a synagogue on the Holy Sabbath. 14-year-old Asher Natan, who had just finished Friday night dinner with his family, was also brutally murdered in the attack. Eli and Natalie Mizrahi, a recently married couple, heard the gunfire and came rushing to the scene in order to treat the victims. The terrorists murdered them at point-blank range. A week ago, 20-year-old Shlomo Lederman stood at a Jerusalem bus stop with his wife. They had just gotten married 2 months prior. Meters away from the couple was Avram Paley and his little boys, 6-year-old Yaakov and 8-year-old Asher. Suddenly, a bright blue sedan driven by a Palestinian terrorist crashed full speed into the bus stop. Shlomo's young wife is now a widow, and Avram, who is currently in critical condition on a ventilator, still does not know that his wife had to bury little Yaakov and Asher without him. These two beautiful children were murdered just for being Jews. Today's meeting should have been convened to condemn the price paid by innocent Israelis for the Palestinian Authority's incitement and hate. I will not let the victims be forgotten. I will now rise for a minute of silence in their memory and the memory of all the other victims of Palestinian terror. I pray for their memory, and I pray that you think of them in the future when discussing the true obstacles to peace in our region. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. I now pass the floor to the representative of Qatar.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. ألقي هذا البيان بالنيابة عن الدول الأعضاء بالمجموعة العربية بنيويورك واستهله بالإعراب عن التهنئة لكم على تولي رئاسة مجلس الأمن لهذا الشهر والتقدير للإحاطة التي أدلى بها المنسق الخاص للأمم المتحدة لعملية السلام في الشرق الأوسط ونائبة المفوض العام لوكالة الأونروا. سيد الرئيس، ترحب المجموعة العربية باعتماد المجلس صباح اليوم البيان الرئاسي المقدم من دولة الإمارات العربية وتعد هذه خطوة مهمة في الوقت المناسب، ونشكر أعضاء المجلس على التحدث بصوت واحد بشأن قضية بالغة الخطورة وتستدعي من المجلس أن يعيرها كل الاهتمام وأن يبقيها موضع نظره. سيد الرئيس، تعبر المجموعة العربية عن قلقها البالغ من التوجهات المتطرفة التي تتخذها الحكومة الإسرائيلية الجديدة في انتهاك صارخ بالتزاماتها كافة بموجب القانون الإنساني الدولي والقانون الدولي لحقوق الإنسان وقرارات مجلس الأمن التي أدت إلى حالة من الاحتقان والتوتر البالغ في الأرض الفلسطينية المحتلة وتهدد السلم والأمن الإقليمي والدولي أبلغ تهديد. وفي هذا الصدد تشدد المجموعة العربية على الدور المحوري لمجلس الأمن بالتصدي لهذه الانتهاكات وفي تحميل مرتكبيها المسؤولية تطبيقا لقواعد المساءلة والشفافية التي تطبق على الجميع بخلاف إسرائيل. وتخص المجموعة العربية بالذكر الوضع في القدس عاصمة الدولة الفلسطينية المقبلة تنفيذا لحل الدولتين الذي يهدد بانفجار الأوضاع نتيجة لإصرار إسرائيلي مستمر بتنفيذ سياسات وإجراءات لا تتفق مع الشرعية الدولية. وتشدد المجموعة على محورية البيان الختامي بمؤتمر القدس صمود وتنمية الذي قررت القمة العربية بالجزائر عقده للتعامل مع هذا التدهور المستمر والذي يعتمد في 12 من فبراير الجاري البيان الختامي المتضمن في شقه السياسي ضمن أمور أخرى النقاط الرئيسية التالية، وهي التأكيد على أن القضية الفلسطينية العادلة ستبقى القضية المركزية للأمة العربية والأحرار والمتمسكين بالقانون الدولي وحقوق الإنسان حول العالم، ولن يتحقق السلام العادل والشامل والأمن والاستقرار في منطقة الشرق الأوسط إلا بعد أن ينال الشعب الفلسطيني حقوقه المشروعة وغير القابلة للتصرف، وعلى رأسها حق العودة والتعويض وتقرير المصير والاستقلال وزوال الاحتلال الإسرائيلي غير القانوني self-determination and independence, as well as establishing the state of Palestine, the sovereign state of Palestine on the occupied Palestinian territories since 1967, with Jerusalem as its capital, and call on the world to stand in solidarity with the Palestinian people in its struggle, as well as advocating for the cause of Palestine and recognize Palestine and granting it the full-fledged membership in the United Nations. Calls on the international community to act immediately to provide protection to the Palestinian people and to put an end to the Israeli aggression on the Palestinian people in all its forms, including the Israeli colonial settlement and the apartheid and discriminatory policies. The communique calls on the Security Council to assume its responsibility to ensure the full implementation of its resolution in relation to the Palestinian cause, including resolution 242, 338, 1515 and 2334, and asks the Council to put an end to the Israeli policies and practices. Third, it stresses that all Israeli practices and plans that are illegal and aim at legitimizing the Israeli annexation are null and void. The practices that aim at changing the demographic makeup of the city and the policy of house demolition and forced displacement from the townships of Al-Quds, including Silwan and Al-Sheikh Jarrah and other neighborhoods in the city. These are all parts of a systematic campaign by Israel for apartheid, and those are all flagrant violations of international relevant resolutions, including Security Council resolutions. Fourth, stresses the importance of protecting Islamic and Christian holy sites in Al-Quds and put an end to Israeli attempts to change the historic and legal status quo of in Al-Quds and attempts to change its name and partition it in and undermine the freedom of Muslim worshippers in the mosque.
والإدانة الشديدة للاقتحامات المتكررة
condemns the repeated attacks on Al-Aqsa Mosque
والمصلين الآمنين فيه
and attacks on its inviolability and the dignity of the worshippers by the Palestinian officials as well as extremist settlers. The communique stresses the rejection to Israeli measures, the illegal and systematic measures that undermine the churches and undermine the presence of Christians in the city. These are all practices that are grave violation to international conventions and resolutions, and they will have negative repercussions on international peace and security. Calls to implement resolutions in relation to Palestine from UN and UNESCO. UNESCO stressed that Al-Aqsa Mosque and in all its area are purely worship place for Muslims and are integral part of a World Heritage Site. It stressed that Palestine had the full authority and sovereignty over Jerusalem and its holy sites, and support the hegemonic custodianship of Islamic and Christian holy sites in Al-Quds and its role in
والتأكيد على أن إدارة أوقاف القدس
Islamic and Christian identity in Al-Quds.
هي الجهة صاحبة الاختصاص الحصري بإدارة شؤون المسجد الأقصى
المبارك and Al-Aqsa Mosque Affairs Department is the only entity that has competence
مطالبة
over
المجتمع
administering
الدولي
the affairs
بتحمل
of
المسؤوليات
Al-Aqsa
القانونية
والأخلاقية
والإنسانية من أجل وقف الفوري للمشاريع الاستيطانية الإسرائيلية في مدينة القدس وإلغاء القوانين العنصرية الإسرائيلية التي تحول سلطات الاحتلال بسحب بطاقات هوية آلاف المقدسيين ومصادرة ممتلكاتهم من خلال ما يسمى بقانون أملاك الغائبين. هذه الإجراءات العنصرية الباطلة تهدف إلى سلب المزيد من الأراضي والعقارات الفلسطينية في البلدة القديمة ومحيطها ومحو الآثار العربية في مدينة القدس المحتلة. إدانة ورفض السياسة الإسرائيلية الممنهجة لتشويه وتغيير الثقافة والهوية العربية والإسلامية في مدينة القدس، سواء من خلال إغلاق المؤسسات الوطنية
the communique condemns and rejects the Israeli policy to distort and change the identity and the culture of the Arabs and Muslims in Al-Quds through the closure of national cultural institutions of Palestine and attempting to change the Palestinian school curricula in Al-Quds city and imposing distorted curricula instead, and impose sanctions, financial and administrative, on the institutions that fail to comply to these policies, leading to their closure. 8. The communique condemns the arbitrary detention and administrative detention policy by Israel. 9. It rejects any decision that breaches the legal status of Al-Quds, including by opening offices or diplomatic missions in the city. This is a breach of Security Council resolutions 476, 478, and General Assembly resolutions. It is an aggression on the right of Palestinian people and a provocation to the sentiment of Arabs, Muslims, and Christians alike, and is a breach to international and United Nations resolutions. 10. The communique welcomes General Assembly resolution 77/247, requesting an advisory opinion from the ICJ on the existence and the impact of the Israeli colonial occupation in Israel. And we call on countries to provide written and oral statements to the court by the date of 25th of July 2023. 11. The communique calls on the ICC to conduct criminal investigation and hold accountable perpetrators of war crimes and crimes against humanity and other crimes being committed by Israel against the Palestinian helpless people, including the crimes of settlement, annexation, aggression, and continued blockade over Gaza, as well as execution of civilians, first responders, and journalists. 12. Calls on international community to provide protection to Palestinian civilians and implement Security Council Resolution 904 and 605. 13. It praises the role of Jordan in the protection and maintenance of Islamic and Christian holy sites in Al-Quds under the custodianship of King Abdullah Al-Thani, and commends the role of Al-Quds Committee chaired by King Mohammed Al-Sadis of Morocco, and commends the efforts of Al-Quds Financial Committee of the Al-Quds Committee, and commends the role of Algeria and Saudi Arabia for the support of Islamic Waqf in Al-Quds, and it thanks Egypt for its historic role in support of Palestinian cause, and it thanks all Arab efforts aiming to preserve Al-Quds city as a capital of the state of Palestine and its Arab, Islamic, and Christian identity and its holy sites, and support its institutions in the face of the settlement activities and policies of Israel. In conclusion, Madam Chair, the Arab group stresses that the Council should observe the application of the same rules of international justice on all issues before it, without discrimination, in particular cases of occupation by force of territories of other countries, in violation of rules of international legitimacy, and stresses that it is fully convinced that the Security Council, with its presidential statement today, would send a strong message to the government of Israel, stating that the international community would not remain silent in the face of these repeated violations, and it will hold accountable the perpetrators. We are looking forward to the briefing by the Special Coordinator next month, showing the implementation of all provisions in today's presidential statement and the relevant Security Council resolutions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I thank the representative of Qatar. There are no more names inscribed in the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.